And Don Fischer, who joins us now, fresh off his trip from Las Vegas, calling the game as Indiana took the loss against Arizona this past Saturday. Thanks for joining us this morning, Don. Obviously, Jim not with us. He may or may not be joining us shortly. But what are some of your opening thoughts on the outcome of this past weekend's game?
Well, obviously disappointed that Indiana didn't play better, especially in the first 10 minutes of the game. That's when Indiana got stung pretty good by Arizona, down 19 points within, 9 minutes of the contest getting underway. I mean, I thought, I don't know if Indiana came out and wasn't ready to play. I don't know if they were casual approaching this game. I don't know what that scenario is because obviously they came out on Thursday. The team got there on Thursday. I was out there all week, but nevertheless, I just don't know if they were quite ready for what they were about to face. And Arizona is one of the best teams in the country. There's no doubt in my mind. I don't care that they got beat by Utah. Everybody thought, well, how'd that happen? Well, it happened because they came back from Hawaii and they weren't ready to play. And so they got beat by Utah, which is a pretty good basketball team in itself. And the next thing you know, Indiana goes up against them and looks the same way that Arizona looked against Utah. They just didn't play up to their capabilities in that early part of the game. I will say this, and there were two things that bothered me. I thought that casual start, or at least the way that looked like it was a casual start, that was part of it. The second thing that bothered me the most was just what Arizona did to Indiana's inside game and points in the paint in this contest. They were dominated 42-22 points in the paint, which means that Trace, Race, Malik, those guys didn't get the job done inside. And that's concerning without question. That can't happen. And if it does happen more often than not, this is going to be a struggle for this Indiana basketball team the rest of the year. But I think it's a bit of an anomaly. And again, I think the approach in this game might have been the biggest problem.
Well, one of the things, Don, I was curious about, you talked about the first 9 or 10 minutes of that basketball game. I don't know if shell-shocked is the right word, but it seemed like to me, Indiana, we know that they hang their hat on defense, and Mike Woodson talks about defense. But when you're not able to get any stops, it just kind of looked like they were looking around like, how are we supposed to stop this team? Now, at some point, they were able to get their offense going, but defensively, I thought there was just a lot of confusion, at least early in the early portion of that game, almost like a scratching of the head, like nobody's supposed to be able to do this to us. We're pretty good defensively, but and to me, that was the biggest difference in that ball game, because outside of those first 9 or 10 minutes, this was a back and forth contest.
Right. I mean, that's the thing that bothers you the most. And again, that to me, that signals, were we ready to play? I mean, was Indiana ready to play this ball game? What was their approach to it? And those are questions I think that Mike Woodson will have to answer, and I think the rest of the team will have to answer here. We're going to have him on the talk show tonight. We'll see what he has to say in that regard. But he said he didn't think Indiana played very well throughout the game. He was not pleased throughout this contest with what his team was able to do. So we'll get more of a picture of what his thoughts are on tonight's Inside IU basketball show. But I just thought the approach, and I wasn't in their meetings, their team meetings leading up to this game. But you get on a trip. They went out there on Thursday, so they had an extra day there that they normally wouldn't have on a regular road trip. Did they have a chance to go out and experience Las Vegas a little bit? And I'm not saying that they went out and got crazy. They didn't do that. But at the same time, what was the approach? I mean, were they casual? Was it too casual? Was it not a business trip, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that may be an issue that Mike probably addresses with this ball club. I don't think there's much question about that. And the other thing is, again, the bigs inside here, they need to make a pact that, hey, I mean, and we'll give Race Thompson credit. I mean, he knocks down 4 threes. That's a career high for him. Yeah. Hey, he only made 3 3-pointers leading up to this ball game this season. Had struggled mightily. He was 3 for 18 going into the game. So, but at the same time, the rebounding in this contest, they got pounded on the boards. And the inside game, again, the 42-22 deficit from scoring points in the paint perspective. Those are all things that are troublesome for a basketball team that Indiana's supposed to be in regard to their bigs.
Yeah, and things aren't going to get any easier this coming Saturday as they travel to Lawrence, Kansas, take on the Jayhawks, who I believe are now a top 4, top 5 team in the country. Once again, what's it going to take? A second game in a row where you're playing a marquee opponent. Do you think that this team has the resiliency to be able to have a better performance in a real road environment this time around?
Well, and here's the other thing: semester exam week. So now you've got something else to take your mind off of basketball here. That's really, really important because semester exams are critical to your basketball team. Not having somebody that's put on probation because of their grades or those kinds of things. So this is an important week for this ball club in that regard. So again, this is a big week for this program, not only from an academic perspective, but from a basketball perspective. And can they bounce back? They obviously did against Nebraska after losing to Rutgers, their first loss of the season in that regard. But this is a ball club right now that's probably going through a little growing process. And that's all part of it, too. I mean, early on in the year, you're trying to find out what you've got, those kinds of things. And let's face facts here. Jalen Hood-Schifino has been out for 4 straight games. That has been a big problem for this basketball team. And it hasn't been a definitive problem in most games, but against a team like Arizona, I think it was a big problem. And I think this team has got to find a way to get him back on the court if it's at all possible. I know that they said Mike said in our pregame show on Saturday that he's getting better, but he still wasn't ready. And he's got another week now in between to get ready for this ball game against Kansas. And I think Indiana really needs this kid. I think he really fits what Indiana needs at this juncture.
Well, and it seemed to me, Don, that in the last couple of games that he hasn't played, Xavier Johnson has kind of gone back to his old ways that we saw last season, where it feels like he's almost trying to press a little bit. Now, he did some good things dishing the ball out. He had 11 assists, scored 11 points, but he was 3 of 13. And then you look at Trey Galloway, 2 of 5, didn't hit a 3-point shot. To me, this was the kind of game. This is an NCAA tournament game. These are the type of teams you're going to have to beat in order to advance, and it takes great guard play. So they didn't get a lot from – they've got to get better production from their guards. I would like to see this game, as you mentioned, with Jalen Hood-Schifino. But have you gotten the sense over these past couple games that without JHS on the floor, that Xavier is pushing too much or trying to take too much responsibility in some of these games, and that's led to maybe some of his recent struggles?
I think that tends to be the case for any point guard. If somebody's missing, they try to take over some kind of role in that regard as well, take that on their shoulders. And I think that is a bit of a problem. Trey Galloway, I think, has played really well in Jalen's absence, but it's just not the same fit, if you know what I'm saying. And I think Galloway comes off the bench. I think he is a tremendous competitor. I like everything I see out of Trey Galloway, and you just wish you could put 3 guards on the floor all the time and have that kind of cohesiveness. But without Hood-Schifino out there, now it's a different role for Trey Galloway, and now he's more of a point guard at times. And look, let's face it. This is all about growing your basketball team at this time of year.
Yeah.
And these kinds of games with Arizona, the game against Nebraska, a bounce back game that they had to have. Those are all learning experiences for your ball club. And at this point in the year, this is what it's all about. You're going to go through some rough spots. Indiana's in that position right now. And if they learn from it, this team will grow dramatically. If they don't learn from it, then we're going to have problems.
And Don, I want to bring up one other aspect from the game that a lot of people have talked about, and that is the sequence where there was the goaltending that wasn't called, and then right afterward you had the flop technical. That seemed to be a major turning point in the game for Indiana in terms of losing momentum as they had it. Arizona was able to get it back after that point, and that happened multiple times throughout the game. But that seemed to be the definitive moment where when you have momentum snatched out of you so suddenly and it's not really something that you did wrong, that can be a lot more difficult to bounce back from than other portions of the game.
Well, John, I'm shocked that you would bring up officiating.
I had to, Don.
No, the truth of the matter is, I hate to say this because I think there have been a lot of great officials over the years in the Big Ten. And I think that officiating in general has just dropped off dramatically over the last 10 years. It's not as good as it used to be. They're elevating guys because more and more of the veteran type officials have gotten out of this business. The Terry Weimers, people like that. There were guys back in the day, Charlie Foudy and not Art White, but I'm trying to think of the other. Anyway, there have been really great officials through the years. And Indiana, or the Big Ten, I should say, used to get great officiating for the most part. Yeah. I don't see that anymore. I don't see that the Big Ten has any dominant official, period. Not one. And you could say, well, DJ Carsonson was in the NCAA. Well, they always take somebody from the Big Ten in the NCAA tournament. I'm not saying DJ is not a good official. I'm not saying that either. I'm simply saying that officiating in general has dropped off dramatically, and there are not as many people interested in becoming officials these days. And the ones that have gotten in there either haven't grown to the level of which we would like to see, or it's just harder to find great officials these days. And I think the Big Ten has been one of the Power 5 conferences that have been the worst at getting the best officials to do their games.
If only the Big Ten could sign like a multi-billion-dollar TV deal and maybe offers better pay and training to some of these officials, maybe they could get it figured out. I feel for them that they haven't been able to get that part figured out. It's a great point, Don, because, and I'm not going to harp on this too much, but you can make the argument that there have been 2 games decided by bad calls, and that was the Ohio State-Rutgers game earlier in the week with a shot that shouldn't have counted, and then the foul that really wasn't in the Purdue-Nebraska game at the end of the game. So it's been a problem. It's not just an Indiana thing. But no. One of the things I wanted to talk about too was, we talked about after a loss, we tend to harp on some of the negatives, and I know you said Mike Woodson didn't think Indiana played well from start to finish, but I have to give Indiana a lot of credit because you're down 20 early in that ball game. They fought back multiple times to get it back to 3 or 4. And I do understand Arizona always had an answer. They couldn't quite overcome that big deficit. But to me, to not have Jalen Hood-Schifino, to get down as bad as they did early and to continue to fight throughout the course of that game, that's where I take the positives and say, I think this team, like you said, Don, is still growing. They're still learning to mesh. They've got a ton of fight that they've got. And I think that that's a really big positive heading into this game and through the rest of the season when they're going to have a tough, 18 Big Ten games remaining. That's a very good thing in my mind heading into the rest of this season.
I agree. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt. Again, when you talk about November and December in college basketball, this is when you grow your team. This is when you learn about your team. What do we need to do differently? Who needs to become more of a factor for us? Can we develop the talent level, especially the young talented guys that you've got? All those things come into play. And here's the other thing that factors in: injuries. Yeah. They always play a part in your program. And a lot of people say, well, that's just an excuse. Well, it's not an excuse. It's a reality. It's just the truth of the matter. You find a guy like Jalen Hood-Schifino who comes in here and all of a sudden, man, we know this guy's special. I mean, you can see it, and you can see what he does out there on the floor and how he helps this basketball team. And now you miss him for 4 straight ball games. Well, all this plays into it. It's given Trey Galloway an opportunity to grow as a player himself. And we know how hard he plays and what he can do. So all these things come into play. And it's a part of what we do and part of what we want to see from your basketball program. Again, November and December, they're the growing time for your basketball program.